Thank you so very much, everyone, for joining us here. We're going to put our conversation about the Sickle Cell Awareness Day online. In front of you very soon, just so we can continue to expand how we have conversation about this whole issue. We understand our guest is joining right now via Zoom, so he can also help shed light on these issues, because it will appear for many people there is the need to, as quickly as possible, demystify some of the factors around sickle cell anemia. A while ago, Ramsey and I were talking about some of the challenges associated with it, but that's still the conversation we want to have on the show this morning. Hopefully, our guest has already joined us this morning, so we can continue to help you understand better what the phenomenon is about and how you can better respond to it. Joining us from Banjul, the capital of the Gambia this morning, is Olga Tejiri Ovigo Ogbede, is a hematologist, blood transfusion science specialist. I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Tejiri, for making our time to join us on the program this morning. All right, we understand that is still being worked on. But Ramsey, a while ago, we were making this point about this whole issue. We've seen parents who even came to protest at some point about how the costs of looking after children with sickle cell anemia was shooting right through the roof in terms of cost of drugs, access to quality, proper care, and things like that. But it will appear we're not having that conversation enough, right?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the issue of sickle cell, like I said earlier, a lot of questions.
Right.
People want to ask a lot of questions. Then the society that we are in, the amenities that we have, we just talked about health facilities a moment ago.
Right.
We're talking about crisis here. Sickle cell anemia is a crisis. That's why they call it crisis. When it started, it has started. But then, do we have what it takes?
Right.
All right. Even if we have what it takes, are they affordable? Is it affordable by the parents or the people who are being affected? These are some of the things that the government should look at. In advanced countries, people, we call it people with special cases. If somebody is AS or maybe SS, that person have a special case, and that person needs to be given enough attention. Maybe where you stay shouldn't be far from a health facility, so that as soon as there is this crisis, people can run there. But then, well, our guest is right here.
Okay, let's quickly take a look at some of the issues this morning with our guest who specializes in these issues. Just like we mentioned a while ago, we are being joined by Olga Tejiri Ovigo Ogbede, hematologist, blood transfusion science specialist. Joins us via Zoom live from Banjul in the Gambia. Thank you so very much, Tejiri, for making our time to join us on this conversation.
Thank you, and good morning. It's good to see you again after so long.
Let's begin first of all with the basics, right? So much of misconception, misgiving, speculation, and assumptions around sickle cell anemia. Beyond what we see by way of manifestation of the crisis, what exactly should the everyday person know?
Okay, so when you say everyday person, let's see how we can break this science down. So sickle cell disease is a group of inherited disorders caused by mutation in a certain gene, right? So to break it even further down, there's how a process that causes or manufactures blood in the body. All of this is genetically mediated, right? So the body is programmed. There's programming in the body that decides what combines with what, how it combines, to produce the blood, the composites of blood in your body. Now, to the average layman from basic biology, we're taught that blood is made up of 4 components, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. Now, inside that red blood cells, there's what we call hemoglobin, right? Now, this hemoglobin is responsible for oxygen transport, essentially, amongst other things, right? So there is a combination of genes that results in the kind of hemoglobin you get as an individual. So essentially, there's A, there's S, there's C, there's F, there's D, there's a cocktail of hemoglobins, right? So depending on how you inherit your genes from your parents, that will determine how your hemoglobin structure is formed. So essentially, you get one part from your father, you get one part from your mother, and ultimately, which gives you your own composition of hemoglobin structure, and which would in turn affect its function. So in sickle cell disease, particularly, you have a person who has inherited one S from one parent and another S from another parent, and that will essentially give the SS genotype, hemoglobin genotype that we know, which would result in the sickle cell disease as it were. Now, the beauty of this disease, or the characteristic feature of this disease, is the fact that this hemoglobin's structure would dictate the effectiveness of its function, right? So we call it sickle cell because of the characteristic shape that the cells would present with. So if you look at it microscopically, while you have cyclical red cells as normal cells, or cyclical hemoglobin structure, sort of oval, if you like, the sickle cell patient's structure is curved, almost like a C, or if you know ancient Israelites, how they would use a sickle in harvesting their fields. So that is why it is called a sickle cell. So having that structure means that, first, the cell doesn't carry as much oxygen as it needs to carry, right? That becomes a significant problem. And beyond that, it doesn't flow very well in the vessels as you'd expect that it would. So beyond not carrying oxygen, which would lead to hypoxia, it would also clog the blood vessels. It would now present with all of the characteristic symptoms as we know, chronic anemia, because of course these cells not being properly structured means they die quickly, right? So while you have a person whose normal blood cells will do maybe about 120 days, you have them doing significantly less. So small stress, oxidative stress as it were, blood cells are dying, right? So they can't cope with as much of the functions as normal red cells will take. So you have chronic anemia, which is the crisis that a lot of persons will know very well. Then in some instances, because of this swelling and clogging, you have pain and swelling, rather, I beg your pardon, in the joints, in the limbs. And these are significant problems that affect the individuals in their everyday, day-to-day life. Then, of course, because this blood is not functioning as well as it should, there's this susceptibility to infection, right? Because the blood would not be doing as much of its protective function as you'd expect that it would. A lot of other problems that will result from all of these circulatory problems.
Been advised, whether by, well, experts like yourself or everyday regular people, saying, look, you can marry this, you can't marry that, AA can marry AS, SS cannot marry SS, blah, 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 blah. Help our viewers to understand these very fundamental dynamics.
Okay, so this comes essential beyond the fact that people need to know their genotypes. The fact that the awareness needs to be out there, and it's the combination of two individuals that determine the outcome of the results in this genotype. It's important that people first know their genotype, and I would not be doing justice to this conversation if I do not lead with that point, right? So if I know my genotype, I know that there's this sort of person I need to combine with, or I should not combine with. We'll talk about procreation. Now, you would essentially have, which is what is most clinically significant, you would have persons who are AA AS, SS. I don't want to talk about all of the other possible genotypes out there. I'm talking about what is most clinically significant, right? It would be best if we are all AA, then we would not be having this conversation, right? But as it so happens, it doesn't always happen that way. So a person who is AA can essentially marry anybody based on genotype. But for a person who is AS, it is very, very, very important that they do not marry another person who is AS, because then the chances of having a sickle cell a child comes up very strongly. Now, some persons have come to argue, especially because of mispassage, I like to put it that way, mispassage of information, and miscommunication, as it were. They think that, okay, my first child, if I'm AS, my partner is AS, then my first child will be AA, the next two will be AS, and the last one will be SS. So I should marry, I should have only one child or maybe two, and then I would have dodged the SS scourge, which is not true. That chart that we were taught growing up is ability, right? Then there was one time I remember more than 10 years ago, I was looking at a documentary where a lady had mentioned that she had 6 children and 3 of them were sickle cell and 3 of them were AS. There was no AA. So it's a matter of probability, and a lot of the time we don't determine how these genes combined and how they sort themselves out to result in the children that we have. So if that is the case, it means that first things first, you want to know your genotype. And then, if you are not in the quote and unquote safe AA percentage of population, you have to look out for a person who is AA to marry. Because when you draw the charts and combinations, you realize that the child needs to get an A from somewhere, right, to escape this sickle cell, right? So if not one of the parents has double AA strand, then you're definitely going to be jumping hoops as to which S lands on you. And if there's S in both sides, you definitely have the chance of coming down with a sickle cell child.
Right. Thank you very much. Let's get to know the measures, all right, the management of sickle cell anemia. How is the management like? Or if there is cure, probably.
Okay, so yes, there are several approaches that you can take to curing sickle cell, but the best and most important factor that comes to play is how accessible are these cures to individuals. We have a Nigerian who pioneered a stem cell transplant in sub-Saharan Africa, a person of Professor Musa Godin-Bazwai. And interestingly, is out of Benin City, Edo State. So he has been doing stem cells successfully for many years. But first problem is how cheap is this intervention? It is pretty expensive and definitely out of the reach of everyday Nigerians. That's on the one hand. Then it has very specific rules that individuals need to follow. So obviously, not a lot of persons who may be able to afford it may be good candidates for stem cell transplant, and that is yet another challenge that may exist, right? Beyond that, there's also gene editing, which I'm not aware, currently exists in Nigeria or in Africa, as it were. It's more of a Western thing as it is today. And if we're talking about stem cell not being affordable and available to the everyday Nigerian, we cannot even be having the conversation about gene editing, etc., etc. So our strongest defense will still lie in prevention and awareness, which is why I must commend that you're doing this conversation today, because for as many persons as will see this video or join the conversation, then you'd understand that knowing and taking preventive measures will help you avoid all of the conversations about cost and cure. And of course, you talk about success because you have to find a good match. If, for example, you're going to do stem cell, and then you have to, before we talk about the money, then we talk about chances of survival, we talk about all of, so there's so many complications that may arise from doing one stem cell, which could be avoided, if a person just knew their genotype and avoided all of the challenges. But Everything else would not result to management, which will come from the presentation, as it were. There's a lot of blood transfusion that comes into managing sickle cell. However, you would ask a very, very vital question, which will be, how readily do Nigerians donate blood? What is the risk factor in blood transfusion and donation? Over time, some persons are even depressed because of all of the crises that they have to go through, all of the pain that they have to endure. So it becomes a significant concern. You have children who complain about their parents, who even end up hating their parents because they are asking questions like, how would my parents know that this sort of thing were possible and still allow it to happen? You have instances where marriages have been destroyed. They have suffered huge losses because of the frequent hospital visits that they have to undergo. Not a lot of persons have the love that can withstand the issues that come with raising a sickle cell child. So when you look at it from that perspective, you'd understand that it is not easy, and it's better if one were to prevent this outcome from existing. So for all of the other in-hospital clinical prevention, yes, there are ways of managing, but something I want to point out is, from statistics that are available, how many sickle cell warriors make it beyond their 20th birthday? You understand? So that's a bit of a problem. From statistics, yet again, sickle cell, 50 to 90% of children under 5 are oftentimes do not make it to their 5th birthday. Newborns do not make it to their 5th birthday. 50 to 90% of newborns don't make it to their 5th birthday, partly because they do not get targeted care. So you need to understand that there is a problem with first having a sickle cell child and then raising a sickle cell child before we even get to talking about curative and other management approach. So these are real issues that need our conscientious assessment.
You alluded to it in passing, though. But let's establish, who knows, maybe a bit more robust perspective, right? Growing up back in the day, one of the things we heard about sickle cell was, well, if anybody was suffering from it, once they were able to break through the 21-year threshold, they were not likely going to stand the risk of dying on account of it. How clinically correct or otherwise is that?
So there's no way to clinically establish that theory, right? I know a lot of sickle cell persons that are well in their old age. I remember one time in one of these states, the chief epidemiologist in one of these states was sickle cell. He didn't tell me, but I could tell. The issue is they have persons who are living with sickle cell disease that are well into their adult life, well, above 30. But when we go by statistics, the first issue is when we look at how many persons, right, die before they get to, how many children get to 5 years old, haven't been born with sickle cell, it's a problem. From statistics, yet again, I understand that if you have about 1,000 deaths, you have up to 490 deaths, right, caused by sickle cell. And of course, even in hospital, sickle cell admissions have an approximate 2.5% death, right? So I don't want to scare you with all of these figures, but these are realities that we're dealing with. And of course, for all of the under 5 deaths that we have from, again, WHO data, we have 0.82% that are sickle cell caused. So it's a bit of a problem. What is more of an issue is the presentation, and which could be a factor of a lot of things. First of all, diet may be a factor, environmental health factors may also exist. Management options may also be a factor why that can exacerbate the situation. Lifestyle choices may also exist, because as I mentioned in the outset, you'd understand that these persons who are living with sickle cell disease are not as strong for the most part as their counterparts, right? Who are not. So there are certain things they may not be able to do. As simple as cold may be a problem for them. So if you live in a place that is significantly cold, you may have a problem if you are a person living with sickle cell. Of course, as I mentioned before, oxidative stress, physical strain may also be a problem. And of course, as one grows older, hematopoiesis reduces from all of the areas where it would happen and concentrates mostly, around the pelvis and thigh bones, as regions where blood is produced. Don't forget that I mentioned that their cells may die quicker, right? Their red cells may die quicker because of the compromise in the structure of their hemoglobin, etc., etc. So if I'm not producing enough blood and my immune systems are not as good because of the way my blood is structured, and of course my bones are not getting all of the nutrients that they need, even the regeneration of blood is not as good as it should. It means that my overall health may ultimately be poor. And that becomes a challenge for myself as an individual. So as we grow older naturally, our immune system also takes a hit. It becomes hard for that person to also do well on the health front as compared to other persons. So you see that a lot of expert care is needed, in the management of persons living with sickle cell, which may not be available depending on the financial power and the geography of the individual. So these are the issues that will oftentimes inform how the outcomes of their health becomes, not necessarily a matter of plain statistics. So it is a matter of how you live and how much the quality of life you're able to afford that would often determine. And sometimes there's always this act of God syndrome that may also often come up. So you have persons who are even better placed in society who may not even make it because of maybe a careless mistake or something that is out of their immediate control.
Let's look at the issue of maybe stigma. For instance, people who have this sickle cell, sometimes they are being stigmatized, and you see people avoiding them. I'm asking this question because of awareness. Some people believe that eating with people who have this sickle cell anemia may result to them having it. So I want you to throw light on that area, the area of stigmatizing, avoiding people that have sickle cell. Some persons will not want to eat with them from the same plate and all of that, associate with them. What would you have to say about that so that people can clear the air as it has to do with this sickle cell anemia?
People fear what they don't understand, and it's very unfortunate that it's human nature to oftentimes want to be avoidant of persons that one considers different. The truth is, sickle cell, in my personal opinion, is no different from malaria, because even in malaria, you have the parasites attack the same red blood cells we're talking about and ultimately attempt to destroy them, right? So what then becomes a difference because a person is born with a blood configuration that also would lead to some. It is not possible to become sickle cell from association, right? Which is why parents, especially parents who know better, must teach their children better, right? The only way a person becomes a sickler, as we call it, is to be born that way, right? So there's no manner of association, except of course you are marrying a person who is also AS genotype, that would result in a sickler, in which case it will not also be you, to be the resultant offspring that becomes the sickle cell person, right? So it will be very, very wrong to begin to stigmatize a person on account of such health outcomes. Don't forget, these are persons who oftentimes may often feel certain ways because of their personal incapacity. So we have persons who are not happy that maybe I cannot do as much heavy lifting. Maybe I'm unhappy because I'm always falling sick. Maybe I'm happy because I look frail. Maybe I'm unhappy because I am like this or like that. So they're already dealing with that mental state. and then you as an individual who should know better begin to stigmatize them, or victimize them on account of all of those things. So if we want to build a better world, we should spread more love and more inclusiveness. So as much as their physical capacity will allow them, I think they should be integrated properly into all activities as much as they can, especially with some considerations for the condition of their health. But otherwise, and aside that, I think they are as good as the next guy.
I don't know, because the people who are affected, it's either you're affected directly or indirectly. Maybe parents, for instance, who have to take care of these children, they need support, they need help. Do you see the government doing enough in that aspect?
Well, we cannot have any public health conversation. We cannot have the government, involved. The truth of the matter is, government must do more, right? More in what sense? First, I think sickle cell is one of those conditions that has fallen through the healthcare cracks, such that it's not something that I believe government actively remembers, especially in this day and age when we are dealing with a lot of outbreaks. So I think infectious diseases are in the forefront of all of government's focus, right? Which is not something we blame them for, especially when there are other avenues that they have created that ordinarily should autopilot, such as we have sickle cell centers. I don't believe they are getting as much attention as they should, right? And of course, the National Blood Service Agency, beyond changing names every key market day, I think it's very, very important that they also get the right support to make blood available, because for a lot of these cases, particularly in newborn, you may have to do exchange blood transfusions. For adults who would also need blood transfusions for other procedures. I think strengthening the blood supply and demand, supply mostly, would help, especially in addressing a lot of these issues. Currently, the structure that we have running and operationally in a lot of our government hospitals is hard, especially for indigent patients who would need to access a lot of these support services. It's difficult. So I think these are specific areas that is beyond treatment options, that is beyond support for research, etc., etc., etc. So some of the facilities that I know that are very big in interventions for sickle cell patients, talking about stem cell, etc., etc., are privately owned. So not a lot of government facilities are involved in these procedures. So that's also another problem. We can talk extensively again about health insurance, but the question will become how much of health insurance is still available to Nigerians. But that's a discussion for another day. So I think these are areas that government can also look into to help the plight of the common man and their problems. However, it's important that awareness leads, because if we know and we can be preventive, I think a lot of these issues will be avoided.
Essentially, I'm afraid that's the much time will allow us have this conversation, at least on this day. But more importantly, we are hoping that the world and, of course, critical stakeholders like yourself, experts, are able to also look inwards, do more, continue to invest appropriately. You mentioned research a while ago, for example. That's also at the heart of efforts to be able to curtail the impact of sickle cell anemia. I would like to say a big thank you to you for coming on the program, and wish you the best of today.
Thank you. You too.
All right, we've been talking with Oganeteji Ovigo Ugbede, is a hematologist and blood transfusion science specialist. He joined us live from the city of Banjul in the Gambia. We'll look forward to a day and many more days beyond today where the conversation about sickle cell anemia will become far better than it has been the last couple of decades. We'll take a quick break at this point, everyone. When we return, we turn attention to Benue State. The president was there on the ground yesterday. What exactly does that mean for the fight against the incessant killing in the food basket of the nation.